Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for this session in the Vital Sites webinar series. I'm Yan Perico, and I'm the Executive Officer of the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas, or WCPA, and I'm very pleased to kick things off. Today's session is part of a broader initiative led by WCPA together with the IUCN Protected and Conserved Areas team. Now, for those who may not be familiar of WCPA, okay, next slide. WCPA or WCPA's work, it's one of the IUCN's 6 expert commissions and a leading global network of professionals focused on protected and conserved areas, or what we often refer to as PCAs. These include marine, inland water, and terrestrial ecosystems. And WCPA brings together over 3,000 experts from around the world to help guide and improve how these areas are designed, managed, and governed. And alongside the IUCN PCA team, WCPA provides technical, scientific, and policy advice to help build systems of PCAs that truly work for the conservation of nature and for the well-being of people. That means focusing on biodiversity at every level, genetic species and ecosystem, and also considering geodiversity and broader natural values. And of course, it's all grounded in principles of sound design, good management, and equitable governance. This Vital Sites webinar series is part of the Journey to the IUCN World Parks Congress in Abu Dhabi in October 2025. It's a platform to connect, share knowledge, and support progress towards area-based conservation targets. To go back in the structure of WCPA, it includes 19 specialist groups and 12 task forces. And today we're very lucky to have the support of two of them, the Connectivity Conservation Specialist Group and the Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group, both of which directly contribute to today's theme. The title of today's webinar is Ecological Connectivity and Transboundary Conservation in Practice, Tools and Insights, and we're really looking forward to a great discussion. But before that, I would like to share that the WCPA 2024 Impact Report is also available. I will drop the link on the chat later. And you can also scan the QR code so you can download it. The report highlights last year's achievements, including support for the implementation of Target 3 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, recognition of diverse governance and management like OECMs, privately protected areas, and work to improve the overall effectiveness of protected and conserved areas. And of course, there's more. Before we dive into today's webinar, just a few quick housekeeping notes. Please keep your microphones muted throughout the sessions to avoid background noise. And if you have any burning questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll either respond directly there or during the Q&A session at the end. And also, I'm not sure if you heard it before you entered the room, this session is being recorded and later on will be shared with the participants. So with that, I will now hand it over to our host, Gabe Opler, who will share more context on today's topic and guide us through the rest of the session. So over to you, Gabe.
Thank you, Yen, and thank you so much to WCPA and IUCN for getting us all together today. I see that we have many folks still joining from the waiting room, so maybe I'll speak a little bit slowly. My name is Gabe Opler. I work for the Center for Large Landscape Conservation. We're an NGO based in Montana in the United States, and I got a pop up here. We host the Secretariat for the IUCN WCPA Connectivity Conservation Specialist Group. Really pleased to be here collaborating also with the Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group. Ecological connectivity and transboundary conservation go hand in hand, as you'll see in the webinar today. They're really complementary sets of ideals and practices. And that is our goal today, is to really highlight the intersections of connectivity and transboundary conservation and hopefully make it more accessible for many of you who are working on these kinds of initiatives. I'm going to put in the chat here the agenda for today, and you'll be able to see that we have a pretty jam-packed session, starting with some introductory remarks from the specialist groups, a bit of a presentation on two of the main products of the specialist groups, publications that encompass the best practices in connectivity conservation and transboundary conservation. And then we're going to be transitioning into a set of case studies from some of our members who will demonstrate the applicability of these. We'll have a question and answer session towards the end, so please go ahead and as we talk, feel free to put in questions into the chat and I'll be reviewing them and we can assess later. And with that, I want to introduce the chairs of the specialist groups. From the Connectivity Conservation Specialist Group, Gary Tabor is the Center for Large Landscape Conservation's CEO. He's also professor of practice at Cornell University. He's based in Bozeman, Montana, and in Ithaca, New York. Jody Hilty is the deputy chair for the CCSG. She's the president and chief scientist at the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative, based in Canmore, Alberta, in Canada. Stefania Petrosillo is an expert on protected areas and international cooperation, a consultant for the European Commission in the framework of biodiversity initiatives with non-EU countries. She's based in Brussels and is the chair of the Transboundary Conservation Specialist Group. And Kevin Zunkel, who is a senior advisor for the Transboundary Specialist Group and based in South Africa, is an independent ecological and environmental management consultant and was the former chair of the Transboundary Specialist Group. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Gary and Stefania, who will introduce each group and give a welcome. Thanks, Gary. Or I guess we have Steph first on the slide here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gabe. Thank you very much to everyone to be here. We are very happy to see so much interest on our topics, and indeed I think they are very important, and so very happy to be here with you. So our specialist group is composed by around 250 members. And our mission is to promote and encourage transboundary conservation for conservation of nature, ecosystem services, and cultural values. But very important for us is promoting peace and cooperation among nations. We will see how the two concepts, transboundary conservation of nature and dialogue among nations, and so peace are concepts very connected. And of course, our aim is to improve knowledge, capacity, and ability of people to implement an effective management of protected areas and territories that are on the borders. We have an executive committee that I chair with the support of Valentina Fontana, that is assistant present here among the participants. We have two senior advisors, Kivan and Maya, that were also previously chairs of the group. And then we have four regional coordinators for Asia, Central and South America, Eastern South Africa, and Europe. I think they are all within the participant, maybe not everyone, but they are always available for you if you want to have more information. Juan, Francisco, Steve, and Doris. Here you can find the link of the page where you can find all contacts. And if not, there is my contacts that, of course, I am completely available to answer to your questions and everything. Next slide, please. Okay, very shortly, what we do is, first of all, to promote networking among our members, so the exchange of experiences on transboundary conservation, and we are very committed to collaborate with the Commission and with the all IUCN family, and to work together with other specialist groups. Then our aim is, as I said, improve skills and management effectiveness. So we share knowledge. We have tools for managers and experts as the tool we will present today. We have several modules of trainings that you can find here, but we are also able to provide specific trainings on demand. We organize webinars. Our webinars are all recorded and available. And we can promote study tours and exchanges on the field, because to meeting in online are great, but meeting in presence are something completely different, as we know. The visibility of transboundary protected areas and importance of the work of cross-border is very important for us. So we promote the participation of national and international events. And we have several communication tools that I invite you to follow. The mailing list is only for members, but in the website, we have a lot of documents and also a page with the news. So please take into account this website. Then we have the LinkedIn page, so please register or put you in contact with this LinkedIn page. And we have our YouTube channel where you can find the recording of all webinars. As already said, for us, dialogue and peace building is very important, as well as the respect of rights and cultural values of indigenous and local communities. And you can find in our logo, indeed, there is also not only animals, but also a people, a person, because indeed for us is very important the humans being values and rights. And something that we are really promoting now is about marine cooperation, because we are aware that cross-border marine cooperation is very complicated, a little bit quite more complicated than terrestrial cooperation. So we are promoting now a sub-working group on marine, and we are starting to work on that. For sure, we will organize new events on it. If you want to join us, I saw already in the chat somebody asking. I will put in the chat the link to ask to enter in the specialist group. Just remind that all specialist groups are part of the commission. So before to enter in our specialist group, you have to be admitted in the WCPA commission. But I will write everything in the chat. Everything that is all for now. So please, I leave the floor to Gary, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. Gary, please.
Okay, if you can put up the slide. Yes, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Transboundary Specialist Group. We do compliment you. I was a member of the Transboundary Group before even the Connectivity Specialist Group was even created. So quickly, Mungabee just reported yesterday that, like every year that the temperature of the world goes up, deforestation and habitat loss continues to set unprecedented records. And connectivity is the countermeasure to fragmentation. We have to figure out a tool to stop it. And also, nature is very, very dynamic, and a lot of the protected areas are very static in their design, but they don't look at time as much as they do in terms of space. And we have to figure out a tool to conserve nature in this dynamic world. And so that's why the Connectivity Conservation Specialist Group came about. You can think that conservation, if to save the biosphere, conservation happens on all lands and seas. It has to happen everywhere, even in urban environments. And parks are the heart and soul, the key organs of nature conservation, but they can't do it alone. And if anyone knows East Africa, 70% of much of the wildlife is outside of protected areas. So how are we going to save this? So we have to protect the circulatory system of nature. That's what connectivity is. That's what we're trying to do. You can't work everywhere outside of a protected area. So strategically, we focus on areas that have the greatest connectivity value between protected areas and to create networks. So although only 10% of protected areas now are connected, in the future, we will not only measure the units of conservation in terms of protected areas, but we'll also measure how connected and the networks of protected areas going forward. And the Connectivity Specialist Group feels we're missing one key tool that many nations already have, but not IUCN, is designated wildlife or ecological corridors. And that is part of our focus for Abu Dhabi coming forward. You can think of the Connectivity Specialist Group as trying to protect the connective tissue of nature. We do two things. We try to conserve corridors or increase permeability in landscapes, and we try to avoid the things that fragment landscapes or seascapes. And that's why we have two major guidelines. Jody's going to talk about the ones for conserving ecological corridors and ecological networks. The second one is how we deal with the growth of linear infrastructure, because that's the main fragmenting force around the world, roads and rails, and their impacts. The Connectivity Specialist Group is only is 9 years old. We were born in Hawaii at the WCC. We have a lot of members. In fact, too many members, that we need to take care of. So we have about 1,200 members in about 130 countries around the world. And because we're so big, we're subdivided into many various communities of strength, of excellence. And we have a marine working group, a working group looking at linear infrastructure through transport. We have a group working on a species and protected area, the Asian elephant working group. And we have a language specific or geographic specific working group working in Latin America. I just want to say that, we complement the Transboundary Specialist Group, and we can't have one or the other. We work together to save nature in a dynamic and fragmenting world. And thank you all for joining us today. Turn it back to you, Gabe.
Thank you, Gary. And yeah, there we go. We have our beautiful cover slide. Well, thanks, Gary, and thank you, Steph. And at this point, in the interest of time, I'm going to dive into the details and turn it over to Kevin, who's going to be speaking on the IUCN Transboundary Conservation Guidelines.
Thanks very much, Gabe. Appreciate that. Wait for my presentation to come up. There we go. Thank you. I think before I go anywhere, Steph did mention Maya Vasilijevich, who was co-chair with me for some time, and preceding that was chair of the group. But I want to just honor Maya for the work she did in terms of securing the funding that was necessary to run the process to develop these guidelines. So I'm sorry Maya's not presenting, but presenting on her behalf and also as one of the co-authors of the guidelines. Next slide, please. So there's been a couple of products that have come out of the specialist group, and the one we're focusing on today is the 2015 guideline, Transboundary Conservation, a Systematic and Integrated Approach. Next slide. And that essentially evolves from the very first guideline that Trevor Sandwith was involved in 2001, Transboundary Protected Areas for Peace and Cooperation. So the current guideline is a revision and an update of the 2001 guideline. Next slide. So just broadly then, the best practice protected area guidelines of the World Commission on Protected Areas have a series of publications, as has already been alluded to. They're pretty special. They represent sort of an authoritative resource for protected area managers. They're a key product of the World Commission on Protected Areas, reflecting global standards, setting the guides. supporting better implementation of conservation action in the field, and building institutional and individual capacity to manage protected areas effectively. Next slide. And then hats off to the sponsors who helped us fund the process for developing these guidelines. You can see them listed there. Next slide. And we started off with a workshop, 24 experts from 16 countries gathered in Austria, where we fleshed out the table of contents and dished out responsibilities for the development of the guidelines. And they were done in partnership with ICIMOD, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. Next slide. And that will give you a quick look at the number of people who are involved in the development of these guidelines. Of course, there's the list of the principal co-editors and co-authors, but a host of other people were involved in providing case studies, etc. So all gratitude to all of that input from around the world. And I'm sure many of you who are on the call will be able to recognize your names in there. So the guidelines were pre-launched at the World Parks Congress in Sydney in 2014, published in May 2015, and then launched officially at what was known as Little Sydney, Protecting Nature in Europe, in Hamburg in 2015. Next slide. And they include basically three elements or components. There's an aspect on principles, which looks at the typologies, the definitions, and an in-depth elaboration on governance for transboundary conservation. And then there's 33 examples from different geographical regions from around the world, regions and ecosystems, different protected area management categories, models for cooperation and transboundary arrangements. So across that spectrum of 33 examples, there's a great coverage of the various ways in which transboundary conservation can be approached. And then there's also the technical information for application in the field. As I said, that's an update of the 2001 guidelines, and there's guidance on management, there's guidance on the transboundary conservation process, on how to go about establishing a transboundary initiative, etc. Next slide. So part one of the guidelines is entitled Understanding Transboundary Conservation, History and Key Concepts, indicating some global trends, providing definitions and typologies, expanding on the benefits of transboundary conservation, and then also expanding on transboundary governance, which is a key element, as we will see later on in the presentation. Next slide. Forgive me for the rapid pace, just trying to make sure that we stick to time and we have enough time for questions and answers towards the end. You can go to the next slide. The data is outdated. As you can see, the last information on the number of transboundary initiatives around the world was in 2007. So very, very outdated and desperately needs to be updated. But the important thing is the trend, which is a very, very positive trend, almost a linear trend, in terms of the number of transboundary initiatives that have been established around the world. Next slide. So just a very quick definition in terms of what is transboundary conservation. It is a process of cooperation to achieve conservation goals across one or more international boundary. Next slide. And the different types of transboundary conservation initiatives could be type 1 being a transboundary protected area, type 2 a transboundary conservation landscape and or seascape. The third one is a transboundary migration conservation area. And then lastly, a special designation Park for Peace. Now I'll expand on those now. You can go to the next slide. And you can see in the illustration there that transboundary protected area is a clearly defined geographical space that is comprised of protected areas that are ecologically connected across one or more international boundary and is under some form of cooperation. So it's really the proximity of those protected areas across the international boundaries that is key there. And the next slide is the transboundary conservation landscape and or seascapes. They are ecologically connected areas that sustain ecological processes and crosses one or more international boundaries, and which includes protected areas as well as multiple resource use areas, and is under some form of cooperation. So in this instance, the protected areas do not necessarily have to be contiguous, but as long as there is some form of sustainable land use between them, that can sustain the flow of those ecological processes. Next slide. And I like this one because there's room for a complete breakdown in the continuity geographically, whereas a particular protected area or conservation area could be in the Northern Hemisphere, connected to one in the Southern Hemisphere, because that is the way in which the migratory species that are being conserved move. And we know that our migratory species move over vast distances. So this would then entail wildlife habitats that are necessary to sustain populations of migratory species and are under some form of cooperation. So that's a key that's been coming through in all three of those typologies, is some form of cooperation. And I'll get to that in more detail when we talk about the governance. Next slide. The last special designation is Park for Peace, which is, it may be applied to any of the three types of transboundary conservation areas, and is dedicated to the promotion, the celebration, and or commemoration of peace and cooperation. Next slide. So models of cooperation, and just very quickly, we won't go into the detail, but essentially from a very loose type of arrangement where there is a sharing of information between the protected areas, the conservation areas across the boundaries, developing a little bit more into where there is consultation between the various parties, or coordinated action, evolving into where there is joint implementation of decisions between the partners in the transboundary conservation area. Next slide. So we know that we continue to make serious mistakes in the way that we relate to our natural world, that there is a huge disconnect between humanity and nature. Transboundary conservation is a mechanism and an approach that can help us correct many of these mistakes and begin to address our increasing vulnerability and introduce resilience to the way we live. And one of the key mistakes that we have made is the way in which we have put in international boundaries. We know that many of them are straight lines, cutting through cultures, cutting through ecosystems, cutting through natural areas. And so transboundary conservation is a way to address those mistakes of the past. Next slide. So some of the benefits, and I think these are pretty self-explanatory, and many of you will be very familiar with these, and speaks to the existence of the Connectivity Conservation Group as well, enhancing ecological functionality and therefore species survival, enhances the potential of shared ecosystems to deliver a broad range of ecosystem goods and services that underpin societies and their economies. It enhances the cultural significance of nature by bringing divided cultures back together again and restoring their links with nature. It enhances the efficiency of day-to-day management of shared issues. It can create the momentum for the harmonization of legal and policy frameworks. Very often the situation where the legal and policy frameworks of participating countries can differ quite significantly. And so by the implementation of a transboundary conservation initiative, these countries can work towards harmonization of those frameworks. And lastly, not least, can provide a foundation from which good political relations, stability, and peace are secured. And that speaks to that designation, that Parks for Peace. So from a governance perspective, there are many types of shared governance in which various actors from two or more countries share power, share authority and responsibility in the decision-making processes. And that too can be an evolutionary process, starting off from very low-key agreements between the countries to collaborate, evolving to the very end in terms of a treaty, which can then be a legal instrument that holds the participating countries accountable for joint decision-making, joint implementation of those decisions, etc. So variations of transboundary governance involve multiple actors, diverse levels of authority, informal and or formal arrangements. And there is no single model, but there are key characteristics that define good governance. And it's important, as we'll see in a moment, that the process of establishing transboundary conservation initiatives are sensitive to the governance dynamics so that the appropriate model is selected that best fits that situation. Next slide. Trends in transboundary governance is, as I've said, there's increasing collaboration, increasing adaptation, and it's increasingly nested within the various legal and policy frameworks of the participating countries. Next slide. And part 2 then deals with from principles to action, and it provides context and planning for the transboundary conservation process, the establishment and management of transboundary conservation initiatives, and then, very importantly, measuring the results, the monitoring and evaluation of transboundary management effectiveness. Next slide. How are we doing for time, Gabe? Are we all right?
Take one more minute, please.
Great, thank you. All right, so this then again shows the various stages of transboundary governance, where if you look at the second row from the top, you diagnose the situation. That's essentially your feasibility assessment. And I'll speak in a moment to the diagnostic tool that is inherent within these guidelines. And then based on the outcome of that feasibility, you'll design the appropriate process to establish it. You will take the action. You will measure, monitor, evaluate, learn, and adapt. Next slide. The best practice examples I've alluded to, so we can skip this slide and move on. The diagnostic tool, very quickly, very useful tool. Paul will speak to this in a moment. 100 questions that guide you, and it can be applied as an individual, within a small group, within a big group, including a bunch of stakeholders. Asks 100 different questions that tests your understanding of the need. Can you make the case for this initiative? Are the appropriate stakeholders ready? Are there opportunities that can be used to speed up the process? What are the risks? How do we respond to those risks, etc.? Next slide. And the tool is quite useful in that at the end of the process, it produces a narrative report that presents the answers in a summarized way and helps in planning the initiative more effectively. So essentially, it gives you a green light, an orange light where there might be some barriers that you can overcome, or possibly even a red light to say, don't go there. It's just not feasible. Next slide. And as Steph alluded to, it has been used to develop training material. We have training material available, and participants are encouraged to use the guidelines and these training materials within their own contexts and languages and cultures. Next slide. I think that's me done. Thanks, Gabe.
Thank you, Kevin. And just so everyone knows, I did put a link in the chat directly to the Transboundary guidelines, so you can access all of these chapters and more directly from there. I'm going to turn it back over to Gary here in a second to to pivot us back into thinking about connectivity. And as you'll see, we'll be bouncing back and forth between the two topics. Gary.
If I could you put up the definition of ecological connectivity? Do we have that slide? As a preamble to Jody's talk, yes. Just so everyone knows that, you know, the challenge we have in ecology, in the application of ecology to conservation, is how do we conserve the patterns on the ground or in the sea that capture the processes that save nature. And so ecological connectivity you can think of as this definition as the definition for an ecological electricity. There's three elements. It's to support the unimpeded movement of species, the connection of habitats without hindrance, so permeability, and the flow of natural processes that sustain life on Earth. So there are abiotic elements that need to move, like rivers and streams, that maintain the ecology for landscapes and coastal landscape seascapes interface all around the world. So these are the elements so that you know what ecological connectivity has. It has a scientific meaning as well as a conservation meaning. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jody, who will go into our guidelines for conserving ecological corridors and ecological networks. Take it away, Jody.
So conservation is all about moments. Gabe, you can turn it to the next slide. That's great. Thanks. And I just want you to know, Gary won't tell you this, but we were sitting in a room with the Convention for Migratory Species trying to figure out how to come up with an agreed upon definition as we were writing the IUCN connectivity guidelines. And Gary actually came up with most of the words for that definition in one blurb out, and it got slightly refined, but everyone goes, yeah, that's it. So, you know, conservation moves forward in moments. So next slide. We've been working, well, so I'll just say I'm from Yellowstone to Yukon, and I have to actually credit Gary again because he was one of the co-founders and early movers of the Yellowstone to Yukon vision. And it's really all about transboundary and connectivity. You can't see it, but there are at least 75 different indigenous territories if you want to add complexity to what transboundary means in the Y2Y region. Also the first international peace park in the world between Waterton and Glacier. And, you know, it's great that this is one of the oldest, more well-known large landscape transboundary movements, but what success looks like is when it is adjacent to yet another movement and another, and the whole world is connected. So how do we get there? Well, we embarked in, I want to say that it was probably around 2012 that the first ideas of moving forward something like this happened. And those ideas take time, and like with the transboundary guidelines, take a lot of people around the world to get to agreement. So many people contributed to this. You know, we've tried to increasingly make it available by making it available in different languages and you know, make it the leading resource so that the world can move forward together in the same way that we work on protected areas in rivers and freshwater bodies, in the marine environment and terrestrially. Next slide. Yeah, so why do we need them? Well, as the world moved from sort of locally based ecology to landscape ecology, what we realized is that protected areas, when they're isolated in a sea of humanity, are more likely to lose species. And it's really important. One of the major tools that, you know, obviously we're promoting is keeping those protected areas connected. And so on the left is just the protected areas standing alone, and on the right is what we envision, both continuous connectivity and stepping stone connectivity between protected areas and OECM. So let's dive in. Next slide. We really wrote these connectivity guidelines knowing that we were coming up to the Convention for Biological Diversity's decision on what they were going to try to achieve by 2030, and knowing that we had to get connectivity in there because it's really important. If we want to get to really slowing and halting the loss of biodiversity, connectivity has to be one of those things. So we needed to consolidate that knowledge and really create sort of the standards that we could all agree on around the world, and ultimately get to tracking conserved corridors through the World Database on Ecological Corridors, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. Next slide. So as Gary said, we had to first get to a common language. What is connectivity? So Gary talked about this CMS definition, but we also needed to include scientists. So that above definition is sort of for the world, for the politicians, but it is equal to the more geeky science definition. And we wanted to make that really clear. If you care about genes and propagules and all that stuff, it's there. Next slide. And of course, connectivity is one tool, right? But what we're really trying to achieve is a connected world for nature. And so that means that connectivity works in conjunction with the protected areas and the OECMs and other natural areas, as shown in the picture. Next slide. And we had to define what ecological corridors are. So really, an ecological corridor is that geographical space that can be maintained and governed for the long term to maintain and enhance ecological connectivity. And it was really important in the international world that these ecological corridors were separate and distinct from protected areas. So some people refer to Y or Yellowstone to Yukon as a corridor. Kind of is, but actually it's an ecological network, and it's made up of protected areas, and in between the protected areas and OECMs are corridors, okay? And so they really are separate and distinct. And this is important because in the world of science, where I come from, we often talk about the matrix and permeability of the matrix, but you can't preserve everything between protected areas. And so you have to sort of choose where are the best places and where is it going to be governed differently to ensure long-term connectivity. Next slide. So, like I said, it's not a substitute for protected areas or OECMs. And it has to be distinctly governed and managed for enduring connectivity outcomes, which means that those connectivity outcomes need to be defined. Is this for an ecosystem? Is this for climate change? Is this for a specific species or set of species? The second, I think I missed number 3. That's very funny. Sorry for that. But you know, the difference between protected areas and OECMs is that OECMs and protected areas have to manage for biodiversity. We hope that ecological corridors are conserved, or they might be wild areas, but they can be degraded as long as they can serve the defined connectivity outcome that it's trying to achieve. And it has to be clear what's allowed and what won't work, what's prohibited, in order to maintain that connectivity. And then finally, just like protected areas, they have to be actively managed. They have to have a management plan. And just like protected areas, these can function in freshwater environments, marine environments, terrestrial environments, or across those biomes. Next slide. So I mentioned that in the guidelines, we pointed to the need to actually not only measure how connected the world is, but to actually know where it's conserved, because otherwise you can measure, okay, we're at 10% connectivity, as Gary referred to now. Well, it might be 8% next year, it might be 6%, but what we actually care about is that it's conserved over the long term. And so we've been working with the WDPA, or the World Database on Protected Areas, to come up with a way that countries can, just like they do for protected areas, submit their conserved ecological corridors, or indigenous peoples or communities can sort of prove that they have a ecological corridor that's being managed well for the long term and the governance is clear. And that's really important. And I want to say what's great. So right now we've just finished with Canada sort of prototyping this and making sure it's working. There's going to be a few other countries that are going to do this, and then I think it's going to be ready to go. And it allows all of us to then look at where are the places that we don't need to worry about and where are the places that we do. So the in the ecological connectivity guidelines, there are 25 examples from around the world in the different biomes. And I think they're great to dive into because there's a lot of work, work going on. Some countries like Bhutan and Tanzania have legislation at a national level and are really far ahead. Other countries are still working more on a bottom-up level. And it just gives you a sense of where everybody's at. So please do take a look at those examples. Next slide. So the last thing that I'll say is that one of the things that the connectivity specialist group has been doing, really under the leadership of Gabe and Gary and Aaron, if he's on here, is really testing these and working on implementation of these guidelines. So you can see a few examples from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Quebec, and Romania, where these guidelines have been taken in. There's been workshops to really make sure that this concept and these things are working across the landscapes. And so if that's something that's of interest to you, to figure out how do you take these sort of high level guidelines and ground them in a place, do reach out to the connectivity specialist group. So I think that's all I've got to say for now. But I will pass it over to Gabe.
Thank you, Jody. Really appreciate both Kevin and Jody laying out the high-level principles from the transboundary and connectivity specialist groups. As you can see, and as I think I saw a question in the chat, these are like I said, principles. These are distillations of best practices from all around the world that are, of course, context dependent and specific. And so as far as bringing them to the ground and implementing for conservation outcomes, this is where we really rely on our membership and the institutions that they are part of to define the projects. And in our next section here on case study insights, hopefully you'll hear a little bit about how these guidelines are being put into practice. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to introduce the case studies on transboundary conservation.
Thanks very much, Gabe. And yeah, very quickly, Paul, if you wouldn't mind coming in, please. Paul Buscher, who is also a independent consultant working out of South Africa. And Paul's going to talk to us about how he applied the diagnostic tool in this particular project. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Kevin. Applying the diagnostic tool, we specifically looked at a potential transboundary conservation area to protect the largest mammal migration in the world. Now, most people think of the Serengeti, but this was specifically looking at the fruit bats from Kasanka National Park in Tanzania, in Zambia, and their distribution into the wider region to see whether that would be possible and whether transfrontier conservation would be able to, or transboundary conservation would be able to contribute significantly to that. The draft assessment tool, the IUCN diagnostic tool, was used in September 24, looking at Zambia and the DRC via CMS's migratory species work, but it was funded by the EU. We specifically focused on the straw-colored fruit bats in the Greater Kasanka ecosystem, where they congregate as the biggest mammal migration in the world, more than 10 million bats in one place, and then dispersing from there into various areas, some of that completely unknown, and what happens and how this can actually be conserved. So we looked at the feasibility of transboundary conservation. Next slide, please. So Kasanka, up in northwestern Zambia, close to North and South Luangwa, as well as to the Benguela swamps, but then also linking into the DRC to see whether the protected areas, as well as that mosaic of landscapes, could provide or protection to these bats and their movement, the habitats required. Next slide. The principle really is looking at how the national parks, the forest reserves, and other conserved areas, as well as OECMs, as well as even urban areas like Lusaka, could contribute known locations, nesting sites, and dispersal sites, how these could all work together to create a space and whether it would work. And put this through the diagnostic tool. Next slide, please. Looking at why this would be important, they are vital for seed dispersal and pollination. This is a large colony of about 10 million in Kasanka National Park for 3 months of the year. But challenges like habitat loss, bushmeat hunting, and zoonotic risks do actually create challenges that need addressing by the two countries. So could cross-border conservation and with migratory corridors identified provide the stepping stones so that this ecological role that the bats support in forest regeneration and biodiversity conservation can be maintained. And the threats do require a transboundary approach, and that's why the two countries work closely together. Next slide. The key activities that were undertaken was looking at it from an ecological assessment, looking at stakeholder engagement with communities, NGOs, governments, CMS, researchers from Max Planck, to be able to understand the actual requirements, looking at the socioeconomic analysis and whether ecotourism could reduce hunting and boost income for affected communities, as well as the policy review, the technical capacity, confirming the transboundary conservation area's ecological necessity, and highlighting the need for community benefits, as well as identifying the challenges which come from hunting and policy gaps between the countries and finding solutions to that. Next slide. The answer out of the diagnostic tool was a very clear yes, but it did come with riders. The actual, as Kevin mentioned, the model that was built, the report that is generated, did give us some guidance, and they came up as next slide. That a transboundary agreement between Zambia as well as the DRC, a legal framework via CMS for policy alignment is required, as well as a relationship between the two partner states. Community initiatives that would be needed if this is going to work, ecotourism, agroforestry to curb hunting, education around raising awareness around the role that bats play in reforestation and forest regeneration, as well as the zoonotic risks that are associated with the hunting and utilization of the bats, as well as capacity building to train stakeholders for monitoring and enforcement, because these bats are not just moving from one protected area to another, but across a complete multiple land use landscape, and to be able to monitor and find out where they're moving and where they are nesting, where they're roosting, as well as monitoring to have a centralized platform for migration data, because the data is lacking, and securing donors and also ecotourism revenue for alternative livelihoods built into this to actually make an alternative business case for the conservation of these bats. And then also partnering with health organizations to look at the zoonotic risks that have risen from this, and ultimately striving for the goal of establishing a sustainable transboundary conservation area to protect the bats and support communities, and address within the Southern Africa context a first transboundary conservation area that moves beyond the normal park to park or terrestrial linkages, but these aerial linkages that build up on stepping stones between key resting areas throughout the bat migration over the time. So the tool works, it gives good guidelines, and it gives direction in the thought process to be able to pick it up. Thank you, Kevin.
Excellent, Paul. Thanks very much for that short, sharp presentation. It's great to see the application of an aspect of the guidelines, the diagnostic tool on the ground, and how it helped that initiative. So next up with a case study is Gwenyai Muti, who is the International Coordinator for the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area, and that is between South Africa, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. And Gwenyai is going to speak to us about how the guidelines helped in the development of joint operational plans for this particular TFCA. Gwenyai, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. So today I'm going to speak on the World Commission. World Commission on Protected Areas Transboundary Conservation Working Group, and essentially, as Kevin has already alluded, I'll be speaking on transboundary governance and how it is aligned to the transboundary conservation guidelines. Next slide, please. So the objectives of the presentation: firstly, I would like to determine how IUCN transboundary conservation guidelines were used to guide governance and also joint planning processes within the GLTFCA. And secondly, I also want to highlight how these guidelines have provided insight and perspective in terms of the processes when we're looking at the transboundary governance issues. So I will focus on governance mechanisms, and governance mechanisms essentially are those governance structures that are in place, and these are dictated by governance instruments or agreements, and they also dictate the hierarchy in terms of decision-making and policy. I'll also discuss the coordination mechanisms, and these are primarily responsible for the day-to-day coordination and implementation of the joint management of actions, and through the structures that are responsible for providing support and also coordinating the governance mechanisms of the GLTFCA. Next slide, please. So I'll just give a broad overview in terms of the GLTFCA. The GLTFCA is a transboundary collaborative agreement that was entered into through a treaty by 3 countries, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and South Africa, focusing on core areas that consist of the Limpopo National Park, Kruger National Park, and the Gonerejou National Park in Zimbabwe. And this was formalized through an international treaty that was signed by the heads of state in December 2002. The institutional arrangements consist, right at the top is the ministerial committee, which constitutes of those ministers that are responsible for environmental issues in each of the 3 countries. And then we also have what is called a joint management board, which is responsible for the management implementation and also the policy issues that pertain to the day-to-day management of this transfrontier park. We also have advisory committees that facilitate thematic integration and alignment. And at an implementation level, at a park level, we have what are called the joint park management committees that facilitate that transboundary collaboration and coordination in terms of implementation at a landscape level. So this is very much aligned to the transboundary conservation guideline, which stipulates that shared governance recognizes that transboundary areas often involve multiple stakeholders. They also include governments, local communities, NGOs, and these guidelines also emphasize shared governance models such as joint management, co-management, and also collaborative governance. So there's a lot of compliance in terms of transboundary governance within the GLTFCA and also alignment to the TBC guidelines. Next slide, please. So the next slide shows us the transition that has been made from the core parks that initially were the part of the GLTP, and how it's migrated to become the broader Great Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area, which is an area that measures over 100,000 square kilometers and also includes compatible conservation areas that are around the GLTFCA, which includes privately owned, state-owned, also community-owned conservation areas that directly border the Transfrontier Conservation Park. And WCPA promotes three types and one special designation of transboundary conservation area. And this specific area falls under type 1, which stipulates that a transboundary protected area that is clearly defined geographically, and the space that consists of protected areas that are ecologically connected across one or more international boundaries, and also involves some form of cooperation between the land units that constitute of the broad transboundary conservation area. Next slide, please. So there are specific instruments and that are governed through SADC, and SADC has got a specific undertaking where it conducted a coordination mechanisms instrument that governs the categorization of the transboundary conservation areas within the GLTFCA. So the GLTFCA is actually listed as a Category A SADC Transfrontier Conservation Area, and it has been established through a trilateral treaty that was signed by heads of state in December 2002, and the joint implementation of activities under the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area is actually guided by what we call a joint management plan. And according to the interpretation of this under the SADC coordinating mechanisms, this joint management plan is actually an instrument which holds value to the treaty. It is an instrument that guides how transboundary governance is implemented, and it also guides in terms of the activities and actions that have to be implemented jointly within that landscape. This guideline for TBC refers to legal frameworks as guidelines provided guidance on the establishment or adopting legal frameworks that facilitate transboundary cooperation, which includes bilateral agreements, cross-border legislation, and also international conventions. So the GLTFCA has been formalized through an international trilateral treaty between the 3 member states of the GLTFCA. Next slide, please. So when we look at the TFCA governance mechanisms, there is a guideline that stipulates how the TFCAs have to be formed in terms of the policy and legislative requirements in line with SADC, and these are guided by the SADC TFCA guidelines of 2014. Under the GLTFCA, right at the top, we've got the Ministerial Committee, we've got the Joint Management Board, and we also have management committees and also task groups that help in terms of implementation of the 10 thematic programs of the GLTFCA. Currently, the GLTFCA does not have an existing secretariat, but activities are implemented through coordination by the secretariat, which is currently represented by the international coordinator, which is myself. And this is very much in alignment with the guideline that focuses on collaboration. And this guideline highlights the importance of establishing clear communication channels, and also defining shared objectives, and also development of joint management plans to ensure the effective conservation across the boundaries. Next slide, please. So if you look at our treaty objectives, they are very much in alignment with transboundary conservation guidelines of WCPA. And I've highlighted in red specific objectives of our trilateral treaty that are very much synchronized. First one is fostering of transnational collaboration and cooperation amongst parties, which will facilitate effective ecosystem management in the area comprising of the Transfrontier Park. Then the second one is to promote alliances in the management of biological natural resources by encouraging social, economic, and other partnerships amongst parties, including private sector, local communities, and non-governmental organizations. We also seek to enhance ecosystem integrity, natural ecological processes by harmonizing environmental management procedures across international boundaries, and also strive to remove artificial barriers that are impeding the natural movement of wildlife. And lastly, I think, which is very much aligned as well, is the establishment of mechanisms to facilitate the exchange of technical, scientific, and legal information for joint management of the ecosystem. Next slide, please.
Just one more minute, please, just so we have other case studies. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So the GLTFCA is split into 10 thematic programs that govern the implementation of all the strategic activities that have been identified through the Joint Strategic Management Plan. And these programs focus on governance and administration, land use planning and management, conservation and wildlife management. We also look at security and wildlife protection, responsible tourism, socioeconomic development, improved land and access, integrated water resource and freshwater ecosystems management, marketing, communication, awareness raising, and lastly, joint training, learning, and skills development. So these are the 10 thematic programs that guide operations within the GLTFCA. And in order to improve efficiency in implementation, the GLTFCA is actually embarked on what we call an institutional reform strategy. And the idea of this was focusing on policy development, advocacy, and also ensuring that there is overall guidance within the GLTFCA, which is hinged on the establishment of geographically located joint park management committees that are responsible for facilitating effective implementation of the GLTFCA. Next slide, please. So that next slide shows you how effective governance is in terms of ensuring sustainable transboundary governance. It shows you how important it is to develop the relevant institutional structures and to have those institutional structures feed into the overall objectives in terms of attaining the mandate of the GLTFCA as enshrined in the trilateral treaty. So as I've already explained right at the top, we've got the ministers that are responsible for developing policy and also responsible for environmental issues in each of the 3 partner states. They work closely with the coordinating party, a role that is shared on a rotating basis. Currently, we've got South Africa, who are the coordinating party for the GLTFCA. And they work very closely with the GLTFCA Secretariat, which I've mentioned that currently consists of myself as the international coordinator. I work with the coordinating country and also feed into the ministerial committee in terms of policy and political decisions. Then I work also closely with the Joint Management Board. And this has also led to the development of what we call the Joint Strategic Management Plan. And this Joint Management Plan cohesively is responsible for implementation of those joint actions. And also it helps to cohesively guide the activities of the GLTFCA for the next 10 years. It is aligned to the SADC MND framework and ensures that there is consistency and also alignment between the joint operational plans, frameworks, policy frameworks, and also this alignment is also ensured in terms of continuity of the core management plans. We are currently working closely with the partner states in ensuring that they integrate these joint frameworks, plans, and strategies in terms of their day-to-day operations, because it helps in terms of that harmonization of legislation, and it also facilitates joint implementation at a transboundary level. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Queenie. I appreciate you laying that out for us. We're going to now transition to a few more short insights from now the Connectivity Conservation Specialist Group. First, we're gonna stay in Africa here, and we're gonna turn it over to Bakari Matili, who is a PhD student at Okavango Research Institute at the University of Botswana, and an assistant lecturer at the College of African Wildlife Management. He's a movement ecologist and wildlife connectivity expert, consulting with the Center for Large Landscape Conservation based in Tanzania. Please, Bakari.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gabriel. Yes, as Gabriel said, my name is Bakari from the College of African Wildlife Management, WECA, in Kilimanjaro, Tanzania. And yes, as he said, I was recently involved in assessing the wildlife corridors in southern Kenya and northern Tanzania, or simply Socknot landscape, through the Center of Landscape Conservation. Yeah. Next slide, please. So without wasting time, let's quickly have a little preamble about Socknot. So Socknot is a very large area. It has the size of approximately 160,077 square kilometers. So it's actually a pretty large area. Socknot itself has 4 major sublandscapes or ecosystems, starting with the Great Serengeti Masai Mara ecosystem. So when we talk about the Great Wildebeest Migration, we always refer to this particular ecosystem or sublandscape. The other sublandscape, it's the Kilimanjaro Amboseli sublandscape, the famous Kilimanjaro mountain. The other one, it's Tarangire Manyara sublandscape or ecosystem, and lastly, the Mkomazi Tsavo sublandscape or ecosystem. In addition to this ecosystem, also Socknot is very diverse in terms of its protected areas. So it has areas such as national parks, conservancies, and etc. Some of these areas are small, while some of them are large, with very high levels of biodiversity in them. So from small animals to very, very large animals like elephants and etc. And one thing to note that PAs are not as big to always sustain the requirements for all these animals here. So at some point, animals have to migrate from one area to another. So from just that, we understand that connectivity is really important in whatever landscape that we are trying to talk about. Next slide. So as many other ecosystems in the world, Socknot also is not like, immune to challenges and issues now. So there are a number of issues that are happening in the Socknot landscape. So one of them is habitat fragmentation and landscape change. So expansion of things such as agriculture, expansion of settlements, infrastructure, fencing, and subdivision. So for example, the expansion of agriculture and settlements. So when we observe like corridors connecting Tarangire and Arusha National Park, there's so much, improvement of, there's so much actually settlements actually happening in that particular area. You can just imagine how this particular area is being impeded to movement. The other one, fencing, let's observe the Masai Mara and the Transmara complex in the corridor that connecting those two areas. There's so much also fencing in those areas there. So connectivity is also significantly impeded in this area here. Things such as human-wildlife conflict, when animals recognize no boundaries. So when these corridors are significantly minimized or very small, in most cases, it also escalates human-wildlife conflicts, because animals go to human-dominated landscapes, go to farms and everywhere, which becomes a problem. Overgrazing and land degradation. We know this Soknot, we have like big tribes here, like the Ma and many other tribes which are significantly pastoralists. So these areas here with all that pastoral population, you can see how much unsustainable sort of livestock numbers can bring an impact to that particular ecosystem. And lastly, competition for resources from cattle as well as from cattle and wildlife. So that is also a problem. And lastly, the problem of climate change is also happening in this area here. So connectivity is really jeopardized in some way or another. So in recognizing this here, let's go to the next slide, please. So in recognizing this here, we thought that it is really very relevant to try to build on previous efforts in the region to assess the corridors and the functionality in the Soknot region. So to do this here, we used a total of 7 focus species to see the functionality of these corridors in this particular region here. So from the species data, we were able to assess the functionality of 24 corridors in the landscape. And to do this here, it was guided by several approaches. So our first main approach was having a transboundary workshop, of which brought together approximately 75 people from working in different parts of the landscape together and see what are the problems and what are the challenges and how can we overcome the challenges and how can we map, so providing of data and everything, who has data and everything. So that started by that. And we then moved to mapping structural corridors for Kenya. As mentioned earlier, that Tanzania has well implemented structural corridors and mapped. Kenya didn't have all that before now. So to start in the same page, we also had to map the structural corridors for Kenya. So we did that and we merged the two, the structural corridors for Tanzania and as well as the structural corridors for Kenya. So that was a complete set of corridors for Tanzania and Kenya. In addition to that, we assessed the corridor structural and functional baseline condition. So in each of the structural corridors, we assessed the baseline condition. And lastly, we assessed the corridor functionality using the following approaches that I'll talk further in the few coming slides. So what are the corridor baseline conditions did we use? So things such as habitat quality, simply indicating the percentage of natural vegetation cover for each corridor. Things such as the total length and density of existing linear infrastructure. So things such as railways, roads of different classes like main roads and everything, very much detailed for each of the corridor. So things like as fencing density and total fence density for each corridor. We didn't have much fencing data for Tanzania, but the data was so much well developed for Kenya. So we also had that. Human population density, levels of protection, and lastly, fragmentation. So things such as number of patches, total core areas, percentage core area, proximity index, GIX frags, connectancy, and etc. All this gives an indication of how much a corridor is connected or it's fragmented. And in addition to that, we also had a couple of fractional indicators. So we had effective resistance for each of the corridors as well as pronet for the Soknot in general. Next slide, please. So let's dive a little bit of how did we assess the functionality of these corridors here using species data. So we basically used 2 approaches. One of the approach was overlap of species location with the corridors. So we had quite a number of occurrence data. So we simply did a very general overlap analysis of where the point is there a corridor below it or not. So that was a very simple one. But we went a little bit further. We understand that data is always a problem now. So at some parts of the corridors or some areas of the landscape didn't have enough data. So we had to come up with different approaches also to, overcome the problem of data deficiency. So we went to the second approach, which was simply comparing structural corridor models with species-specific models. So for this here, we had basically 3 approaches. So the first approach was simply the comparison of current flow values And the second approach was the comparison of cost-weighted distance values. And lastly, we did a percentage overlap of the functional corridors with the structural corridors, just to keep you updated that an assumption generally for the current is that areas of low currency support connectivity, and an assumption for cost-weighted distance, areas of high cost-weighted distance didn't support connectivity or connectivity. So generally, all this effort at the end of the day, they led what it's so-called connectivity atlas for that particular landscape, or connectivity atlas for the SOCNOT landscape. Next slide, please. Yes, so generally, after doing all those things here, we came up to a very well-detailed connectivity atlas. So it's called Transboundary Corridor Atlas for Southern Kenya and Northern Tanzania landscape, or SOCNOT landscape. In this particular report or atlas, there are detailed maps of the landscape. There are also baseline connectivity indicators for each of the 24 corridors, so information of fragmentation, index connectivity, and all other sort of baseline connectivity indicators. Connectivity status for each of the corridor. So we mapped all the corridors and say this corridor is impeded, this corridor is functional, this corridor needs adjustment, and everything related to that. So that was so much detailed in the atlas. And lastly, we also had needs for effective conservation planning and improvement. So what should be done in each of the corridor to make it more accessible, or to make it more connected to its core areas or core habitat. All of this here will be kept together in an interactive online platform, which will be available very soon. Next slide, please. So generally, based on our analysis, so 10 out of the 24 corridors that we assessed were functional, and they're indicated, I think, in some sort of green colors. 10 out of the 24 corridors also, we recommended that the corridor's boundary should be changed or should be moved slightly east, slightly west, slightly north or south. 4 out of the 24 corridor were extensively impeded, so no movement at all. So 4 out of the 24 were not functional in many ways. Next slide, please. So based on this report here, we also outlined a few next steps. So one of the major things now, our conservation efforts now should be corridor focused, not the landscape in general. And apart from that, we also suggested that, but for Kenya, we have like delineation of these corridors here and put them into like, corridor plans and everything for the country. This will significantly help in preserving these corridors here, engaging stakeholders in developing governance structures. So things like local communities or communities living in these areas here. So we involve them in like, making governance structure for these corridors here, monitor the corridor functionality based on the defined indicators, and identify corridor indicators. So it's like, generally managing these corridors independently. Yes, next slide, please. Sure, so that's it. Yeah, it was a very short one, I think so. And asante sana for your time and listening.
Thank you so much, Bakari. Yes, very, these are tip of the iceberg of these major projects, and we encourage everyone to seek out the information, and we will share to get into the details. So on that note, I'll mention, of course, we are not on time as far as the agenda goes. I encourage you to stick with us as long as you can, but of course, understand if at the half hour your schedules say otherwise. And to our remaining case study presenters, please take your 5 minutes. So next we have Marie-Andrée Tougatelier. She's the manager of the Quebec Ecological Corridors Initiative in Quebec, Canada, and very pleased to work directly with her. And thanks so much for giving us a taste of this project.
Thank you, Gabe. So it's really a pleasure to have this opportunity to share not only some of our work from the Quebec Ecological Corridor Initiative, but really how the guideline inspired us and it's still inspiring us, and also how the guidelines really help us to develop impactful tools for connectivity conservation. So as said, I'm working for the Nature Conservancy of Canada, which is Canada's unifying force for nature. We're working to deliver large-scale permanent land conservation across the country. And it is through the Nature Conservancy of Canada that in 2017, the Quebec Ecological Corridor Initiative was initiated. So the Quebec Ecological Corridors Initiative is a provincial initiative based in the province of Quebec, which is located just eastern portion of Canada. And the initiative is led by the Nature Conservancy of Canada, but really implemented in strong partnership with numerous partners. And what we do, well, we are implementing a collective approach to land use planning in order to increase the conservation of natural ecosystems that are connected by ecological corridors. And how we do that? Next slide, please. Well, first, we're connecting people. The initiative is really about human connection first. So we're connecting land planner, agro planners, forest planners, governments, conservation groups, and many more. And together, we are working towards a shared unifying vision for the southern portion of the province. Next slide, please. Again, about how we work with the initiative, we have mainly two scales of implementation. We have the regional scale and for the regional scale, we are working with 10 regional facilitators, which are 10 NGOs. Each of them is working in its own region, and they are collecting data, working with the stakeholders, bringing guidance, and making sure that through their region, we have a vision and we have actions, implementation of actions for connectivity. And at the same time, as we are working with the 10 regional facilitators, we're also working with a network of provincial and transboundary partners. Next slide. But still, even though we have this very large network of partners working regional, working provincial and transboundary, maintaining connectivity is really complex. It's often, if not all of our projects are large scale, including many regions, private land, public lands, and a lot of people. And a lot of people means with various values, priorities, issues are often complex, and there's uncertainty, there's unknown. So maintaining connectivity, as you know, it's really complex. And the management and monitoring plan, as explained into the guidelines from the IUCN, really help us to dive into that complexity and to develop effective tools. Next slide, please. So as I said, being referred to those guidelines was extremely helpful for us. And in 2023, we started a collaboration with the Center for Large Landscape Conservation. So thanks to that collaboration, we received their support to have a better understanding of what can be a management and monitoring plans and how can it be implemented. And from this partnership, we started 3 pilot projects. So we worked with our regional partners on 3 different management and monitoring plan. And for each of them, well, the connectivity zone was delineated. That's a tough word in English. We work with all stakeholders from each zone. So everyone was around the table to discuss the values associated to the land, as well as develop a common vision for the connectivity zone, identify targets, objectives, and collective action plans. So this is what was done, but we're still at the beginning of the project, but because then implementation start. So we really see those management and monitoring plan as a guidance for the stakeholders. So our hope is that stakeholders can refer to that guide. So they will have guidance about the best practices for connectivity. And we have like specific actions for each type of stakeholders that they can include in their own land planning or land management activities. Our current focus is now on improving governance for those plans, as well as making sure that all plans have simple but strong monitoring plans. And well, for sure to keep going with the implementation of the actions from those plans. So here on this last slide, you see the location of those 3 examples, the 3 plans we have been working on. So all locations are indicated with the green circles. You also see the logos from all the NGOs we're working with for each of those plans. And you see at the center of the map a yellow circle. So this is a new plan that we are starting in the coming months. And we're really looking forward to expand the idea of having one management and monitoring plan for each of our priority connectivity zone in the province of Quebec. So that being said, that was quick. But if you want to know more, I'll put 2 links in the chat so you can have more information about our projects.
Merci, Marie-Andre, thank you so much. And I'll reiterate, I put in the chat here where this is one of those ground truthing workshop processes that is intended to bring those guidelines into practice. And the Nature Conservancy of Canada and Marie-Andre has been a beautiful partner for implementing these concepts into the most granular level of management plans. And with that said, we're going to pivot now to our final case study presented by Shirin Karyeva. She's a biodiversity and protected areas expert joining us from Turkmenistan. She's the focal point for the CBD and SBSTA for the country of Turkmenistan, also the focal point for WCPA for Central Asia, and has been managing the project funded by the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund in collaboration with CLLC since 2021. Shirin, please.
Yes, thank you, Gabrielle. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you for joining us to this webinar. So as presented by Gabrielle, I'm managing this project since 2020-21. And we have the MOU with the CLLC and the Minister of Environment Protection of Turkmenistan. But continuing this project, which was in the phase 1 and the phase 2, we have another, starting from January of this year, we have a project under the CBD initiative, the PBDI, Peace and Biodiversity Initiative, which is supported by the government of Korea. And it is continuing our efforts of transboundary nomination of Turkmenistan Koytandak protected area, which is strict protected area, and Surkhan protected area, which is in Uzbekistan, to the Committee of World Heritage Committee for the UNESCO World Heritage to be included into the list of UNESCO World Heritage. So, and I am very glad to give you a brief insight into these projects, and now entering the 5th years of the project, continuing with PBDI funding. Next slide, please. So we listen case studies from Africa. Thank you, colleagues, and Canada. Now we go to Middle Asia, Central Asia. And you can see here a few maps from Google, which the Koytandak and Surkhan images, how it's located in the world is the Central Asia. We border with Iran and Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan on the west, on the eastern part. And we have this as a premier ally, the biodiversity hotspot in Central Asia. It's one of the hotspots from Central Asia, which was identified by the CPF, Critical Ecosystem Partnership Foundation. And Kugitan Mountain Range here on the border with Surkhan, Uzbekistan. It's one area, it's one hotspot, it's one Kaplanker, or sorry, Koytanda or Kugitank in Russian. So it was one in the past during before the joining the Soviet. It was one country, Uzbekistan. Then it was divided into Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. So it's one ecosystem. We could not speak about Koytandak. Nothing says about Surkhan protected area, which is Uzbekistan. And this is the hotspot, is one of the hotspot, Pamir Alai. And we have another mountain hotspots in Central Asia and in Turkmenistan as well. So this region extends from the hot, dry semi-desert plains of the Amudarya River Valley to snow-capped peaks. Also, the ecosystem hosts rare species such as markhor, Ural sheep, lynx, and is important habitat for pistachio and juniper forest. Over the course of the project, we undertook research, engaged with local communities and decision makers, and fostering on ongoing discussions how to conserve this extraordinary natural area, including how to ensure its habitat areas remain connected. This presentation will give you some insights into the work of our joint team together with international experts toward better understanding the ecosystem, documenting its rich biodiversity and resources, and enhancing capacity for surveying, monitoring, for enforcing its conservation within and around the reserves. Yes, this slide, please. So the project activities and project goal is coordinate wildlife survey, exchange of the data, organize exchange visits to rangers in both countries, and as well as coordinates workshops and with stakeholders to develop the more common understanding of the World Heritage nomination process, including agreement of joint roadmap for submission and enhancing the dialogue about the opportunities for great conservation of structural, functional connectivity of these species and habitats among protected areas managers, among researchers and representatives of local, regional, national government. And here, with the support of PBDI, with their support, we developed the joint roadmap together with the experts of Michael Zuko Foundation, which is supported, supporting this and previous projects. And here I will brief only on the activities which were undertaken within the CPF CLC project. And next step is our nomination for UNESCO World Heritage Committee, because the activities to nominate this unique Koytandak mountain ecosystem started more than 10 years ago when we started these activities under the BirdLife International, the RSPB project, and submitted this nomination as a national site. But we get a recommendation from the IUCN experts to have this transboundary with and work with Uzbekistan and to nominate Surkhan as well as a joint as one unique ecosystem. Next, please. And so here within, are you listening? Do you hear me? It's okay?
Yep, perfect, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So together with CLLC, CPF projects, and international experts jointly from Norwegian, from USA, from other countries, we have these missions for wildlife research and monitoring. We identify all the species we have in the list. We are doing the camera trapping, and we also have our wildlife research expert missions to Turkmenistan. Next, please. Here you can find, yes, some images from our camera traps of markhor, from lynx and others, birds and unique our endemic species from the growth. And we have this monitoring research activities over 5 years within only this project, but activities started more than 10 years ago when we had other international experts joining to travel to Koytanda, Turkmenistan. Next, please. And within this richness of biodiversity and ecosystem, we also identify cultural and geological heritage. And we have unique this plateau, Dinazar Plateau in Turkmenistan. And they were also described when we submitted the first nomination dossier to UNESCO World Heritage. Next, please. We also engage with the community. We work with the local stakeholders, with authorities of these region tribes, and to how to work with local communities, how to decrease the level of overgrazing, which is a big problem and threat to protected area. And it is allowed grazing outside this protected area. It is allowed in wildlife sanctuaries, but sometimes there are some non-legal, illegal pasturing. And we, all this within the project, we submit all our proposals and recommendations to avoid such cases. Then we have this connectivity workshop, which, next please, was undertaken with the experts from CLLC, Aaron Gabriel, they will travel to Turkmenistan. And we have this connectivity workshop 2 years ago. We use the guidelines of the IUCN guidelines on connectivity, and we apply these guidelines to identify corridors in Kyrgyzstan nature protected areas. You can see here the report is published in English and Russian. And we identify 7 ecological corridors which connect core protected area with other wildlife sanctuaries and another parts of which are outside the sanctuaries, like OSAMs. So all recommendations were submitted to the ministry with the schematic map you can see here on the slide. Then we use this smart, first time in Turkmenistan and first time in protected areas, Kyrgyzstan. We use smart monitoring, which is spatial monitoring and reporting tool. We adapt this smart program to our computer and mobiles. And after the training of rangers, we adapt this and use this smart monitoring. And we have everyday monitoring using with smart, and staff of rangers, they report to the ministry. You can see here there's also the report, example of the report. And we introduce this smart into other protected areas of Turkmenistan under another project, Conservation XLAT, which is ongoing here in Turkmenistan. And here now, currently under the UNDP project, we are trying to apply smart into other 2 protected areas. Next, please. Sorry. And all our recommendations, our research, monitoring reports, and ideas, they were presented at the COP14 CMS in Samarkand last year, and in 2023, sorry, and last year on the CBD COP15, we presented during our connectivity side event. And next, please. We also apply this connectivity IUCN guidelines to Uzbekistan part in Surkhan Nature Reserve. We have mission there of our national team, which visited Surkhan protected areas with rangers, with scientists and the ministry staff. And we also have this connectivity workshop in Uzbekistan, which apply the guidelines of IUCN and identify also corridors for connectivity in Surkhan Nature Reserve. Next, please. And now we completed these 2 phases of the project, which were more than 4 years implemented in both countries. And now we started, as I told, to implement this with the with support of Michael Luko Foundation, the German NGO, international NGO, because they have good experience using these UNESCO criteria and IUCN criteria for nomination of UNESCO World Heritage. And we work with Michael Zuko Foundation and nominate 1.5 years ago, our desert ecosystem called Winter Deserts of Turan. First time in all this nomination was done by Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan experts together with the Michael Zuko Foundation experts. And here you can see that we started with development of the roadmap to implement the roadmap to invite these experts as IUCN UNESCO World Heritage experts to use their expertise and nominate our Koitandak, Surhan protected area, which have to be nominated by the end of this year as tentative, to be included into the tentative list. And then we have to develop the whole proposal dossier, nomination dossier, according to the new guidelines of UNESCO. So this is like success stories, what was done within our project. Brief in 5 minutes is, I tried to do my best to share with our results of the project. And next tips, of course, we have worked on the ecological connectivity and the creation, the ecological corridors since maybe more than 25 years ago under the WWF project. And that time we have some examples in other protected areas as Batris, where the first ecological corridors were established in 2014 under the decree of the president of Turkmenistan. So we have these corridors in Batris. We have to use these connectivity guidelines applied to other protected areas, which are on the northern part of Turkmenistan, and ongoing project under the Conservation XLab. And we work with Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Kyrgyzstan to conserve these corridors for Persian leopard and snow leopard in Kyrgyzstan. So, and we apply the guidelines of connectivity and other CBD global biodiversity framework. These require from us to have this OECM, which is part of connectivity. So all these international guidance, international conventions, obligations, we are trying to apply, and we need this update, our legislation now. We are working with the ministry and with the other international project in Turkmenistan, and we are in the process of creation of the new protected areas in Balkan, and apply these OECM guidelines, KBA guidelines, and other guidelines for ecological corridors, for networks between country, within the country, and we need, the problem is that we need to modify our border fences to have this migration for ungulates between Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. This is first, that is important and urgent issues we have to do. And then we will continue working with Kogitang Surhan and UNESCO World Heritage to nominate them as a transboundary, transnational second nomination this year. We hope that we will implement this in coming future nearest years. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirin. You're so right. It's very hard to condense 5 years into 5 minutes. But I appreciate all of our case study presenters doing their best and bringing us, closer into contact with where the work really is happening on the ground. I want to close up very soon. And in one minute, I'm going to just say that the prime opportunity for any of you who are, interested in these topics and to follow along within the IUCN universe is coming up this October in Abu Dhabi. Next slide, please. And specifically, I just want to point out that, at least from the connectivity standpoint, there's a new motion. And if you are an IUCN member, or if you represent an organization that's a member, the comment period is open and voting will occur later this summer on the motion that is intending to increase recognition and reporting specifically for ecological corridors. I'm not going to belabor the point, but I'll put the link in the chat for seeking out that information, and to point out that there are many other motions in the IUCN policy process, which are seeking to strengthen IUCN's commitment to connectivity and to transboundary conservation. Next slide. Additionally, at the Congress, we will hopefully have a number of forum events that will have more chances in person to, or remote if you're attending remotely, to explore some of the topics that we just touched the surface on today. These are pending decision from the Congress organizers, but stay tuned to see what will be happening in Abu Dhabi. And go ahead. Yeah, and then one final plug for an area or a conservation tool that is increasingly bringing together transboundary and connectivity conservation, and these are biosphere reserves. And I just finally wanted to point out that the World Congress on Biospheres is coming up, and there's also an opportunity for policy to adopt corridors within there. So those are my conclusions. As far as next steps, I also just want to thank everyone for attending and especially bearing with the length of the webinar here. Clearly, there's a lot to go on. Hopefully in the chat, you had your questions answered. Hopefully you also have these links to explore further information, and it's an ongoing conversation. So thank you again. I'm going to leave it to Steph for the final word.
Yes, thank you very much. Really, 2 words. Thank you very much for your presence again. It was very, very interesting for the speakers. Thank you a lot. We hope to be able to continue our conversations in the Congress, but anyway, the specialist groups are there for you. So please join us, because your experiences are crucial to build all together a community very committed to protect our planet. I think that today some concepts were very clear. So one is that science must be clearly the base of our decisions, but is not enough. We need stakeholders engagement. We need to speak with the communities, especially when we speak about connectivity. And we need to speak with the decision makers and politicians when we speak about transboundary. So definitely it's not only about nature. And for the tools that we have presented today, they are not the answers, but they are something that can help. So it's a sort of menu that we offer to you. You can use it, you can apply it, and adapt them for your specific needs and realities. And we are we are here to help you, to support as much as we can. Thank you very much again, and see you for the next webinars on the next meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you for Jan and the IUCN people for the technical aspect and to host us for this webinar. Bye-bye.